The howling echoed through the twilight as Penelope Vance clutched her father's pocket watch, the last remnant of a family now gone. It was 1876, and the California wilderness showed no mercy to a woman alone. She stared through the cabin's grimy window at the gray shadows circling through the pines' wolves, growing bolder with each passing night. Sierra City had once seemed like salvation when she'd inherited her uncle's cabin, but now felt like a death sentence as winter descended upon the Sierra Nevada. The wolf pack had appeared 3 nights ago, at first just distant howls, then glimpses of silver-gray bodies slipping between trees. Tonight they ventured closer than ever, amber eyes reflecting the faint glow from her lantern. Penelope counted 7 of them, lean and hungry. With food stores dwindling and no horse to ride into town, she gripped her father's old rifle, knowing full well the 6 bullets wouldn't be enough if they decided to rush the cabin. A sudden crack from outside made her jolt, not the wolves, something heavier. Footsteps. Human footsteps creaking across her porch. Penelope steadied the rifle against her shoulder, aiming at the door. Her finger trembled against the trigger as 3 firm knocks echoed through the cabin. "Madam, anybody home?" A deep male voice called out, steady and calm despite the howling that had intensified. Penelope inched toward the door, rifle still raised. "State your business," she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Tucker Yates. Just passing through when I spotted your cabin and the wolf pack. Thought you might need assistance." "I don't need charity from a stranger," she replied, though her empty pantry and the wolves' howls argued otherwise. A low chuckle came through the door. "Not offering charity, madam, just seems we might help each other. Night's falling, those wolves are mighty hungry, and my horse could use some rest. I've got supplies to share." Penelope hesitated, weighing her options. The wolves or the stranger, both potential threats, but at least one might be reasoned with. "You armed?" she asked. "Yes, madam." "Rifle and a Colt." Step back from the door, 5 paces. She heard his boots retreat across the wooden planks. Slowly, she unlatched the door and pulled it open just enough to see him. He stood exactly 5 paces back as instructed, hands visible at his sides. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes a clear, steady blue held no malice. A dusty cowboy hat sat atop dark hair streaked with early silver at the temples. Behind him, tethered to the porch railing, a chestnut mare snorted nervously at the wolves' scent. "Those wolves been troubling you long?" he asked, nodding toward the tree line where shapes still moved in the fading light. 3 nights now, Penelope admitted, the rifle still half raised. Tucker nodded, his gaze moving from her to the wolves and back. "They're hungry, bad year for game." "Mind if I bring my horse around back? There's somewhere I can shelter her." Penelope considered him carefully. "Small lean-to behind the cabin, not much, but it'll keep her out of the wind." "Appreciate it." He turned to untie his horse, then paused. "I'll sleep out here on your porch tonight if that suits you. Keep watch." "The wolves, nothing gets through me, madam," he stated simply, not as boast but as fact. Not wolves, not trouble of any kind. Something in his tone, in the steadiness of his gaze, made her believe him. She nodded once, then stepped back. "You can come in to eat, then the porch." After Tucker had settled his horse, Penelope allowed him inside just long enough to share a meager meal of beans and the jerky he'd contributed from his saddlebags. He spoke little, answering her questions with short, practical responses. He'd been working cattle drives north from Texas, was heading to Sacramento for the winter, had no family to speak of. He asked nothing of her story, seeming to understand her reluctance to share. As promised, when the meal was done, he took his bedroll to the porch without complaint. Penelope watched through a crack in the curtains as he arranged his sleeping space, rifle within easy reach, positioned to view both the approach to the cabin and the woods where the wolves lurked. Throughout the night, she woke to the sound of howling, but each time she peered outside, Tucker sat alert, sometimes standing at the railing, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. Once she saw him fire a shot into the air when the wolves ventured too close, sending them retreating back into the trees. By morning, Penelope had made her decision. When Tucker folded his bedroll and prepared to leave, she stepped onto the porch. "Stay," she said, the word coming out more command than request. At least until the wolves move on. I've got work needs doing and I can provide meals. Tucker studied her face, then glanced at the Warren cabin. You've been managing alone since my uncle passed in the spring, left me this place. He nodded slowly. Wolves might stay a while, food's scarce up here. So is help, she countered. I can pay a little, not much. Don't need payment, but I won't turn down shelter and food. He extended his hand. Partners then, until the wolves move on. Penelope took his calloused hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip. Partners, she agreed. That evening, as dusk settled over the mountains, Tucker dragged the rocking chair from inside to the porch and settled himself with his rifle across his lap. Penelope brought him coffee and sat on the porch step, watching as the wolves emerged once more from the trees. They're bold, she observed. Desperate, Tucker corrected. Been a dry year, game's thin. How'd you learn about wolves? Tucker sipped his coffee. Lived among 'em, in a manner of speaking. Spent 2 winters with a Sioux family up in Dakota Territory. Man who took me in taught me their ways. Penelope turned to study him. You lived with the Sioux after the war, didn't much care for what waited back home in Texas. His eyes remained on the trees. Man can learn a lot from people who understand the land. What brought you to California? A slight smile crossed his face. Never seen the ocean, figured I'd head west until I couldn't go any further. The wolf pack circled closer, their movements like flowing water around the clearing. Tucker stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Inside now, Miss Vance, he said quietly. They're testing boundaries tonight. Penelope hesitated. And you, I'll be fine. Nothing gets through me, remember. The confidence in his voice wasn't bravado, but experience. Inside, Penelope watched through the window as Tucker fired a warning shot that sent the wolves scattering temporarily. When they returned an hour later, he'd built a small fire in a ring of stones near the porch steps, the flames creating a boundary the animals wouldn't cross. Throughout the night, she checked on him, finding him always vigilant, sometimes standing, sometimes seated but never sleeping. By dawn, dark circles shadowed his eyes, but he waved off her concern. I'll sleep a bit while the sun's up, he said. Wolves will be bedded down too. The day brought heavy clouds and the threat of early snow. Penelope set Tucker up on a pallet in the main room while she busied herself with chores, trying not to think about how comforting it felt having another person in the cabin after months of solitude. Around midday, as Tucker slept and Penelope mended a torn shirt, a sharp knock at the door startled her. She grabbed the rifle before answering, finding a man in a dusty suit standing on her porch. Mrs. Vance, he asked, removing his hat. Miss, she corrected. Who's asking? Harold Wilmington, representing Sierra Mining Company. He extended a card which Penelope didn't take. I've come to discuss your property. Nothing to discuss, it's mine. Wilmington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you're unaware that Sierra Mining has purchased most of the surrounding properties. Your uncle's land is inconveniently situated among our holdings. My uncle left this land to me free and clear. I've seen the deed. Of course, of course. Wilmington's gaze moved past her, spotting Tucker's bedroll and saddlebags, his eyebrows raised. I wasn't aware you had. Company, Miss Vance, my apologies for the intrusion. State your business and be done with it, Penelope said firmly. Simply this. Sierra Mining is prepared to offer you 3 times what this property is worth. Quite generous, considering its remote location, and he glanced meaningfully at the shabby cabin condition. Not for sale. Good day, Mr. Wilmington. As she began to close the door, his foot shot out, preventing it from closing. Miss Vance, I strongly advise you to reconsider. These mountains can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen. She ain't alone. Tucker's voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. He moved to the doorway, his tall frame filling the space beside Penelope. Though he'd clearly just woken, his hand rested casually near his holstered Colt. Wilmington's foot retreated. I see. Well, the offer stands, Miss Vance, for now. His eyes flickered to Tucker. Good day to you both. As the mining company man departed down the overgrown path, Tucker watched him until he disappeared among the trees. How long has he been bothering you? He asked. First time he's come in person, Penelope replied. Been getting letters since summer. Tucker nodded thoughtfully. Mining company wants your land bad enough to send someone all the way out here before winter sets in. Uncle Ezra always said there might be gold in the North Creek, but he was too old to work it himself. She shrugged. Never had time to look myself. That evening, as they shared a rabbit stew Tucker had prepared from a successful afternoon hunt, Penelope found herself studying him across the table. "Why'd you stay?" she asked suddenly. "Truth now." Tucker considered her question, taking his time as he seemed to with all things. "Saw a woman alone facing down wolves, both the four-legged kind and the two-legged sort like Wilmington." He set down his spoon. "Reminded me of my sister after her husband died. Stubborn as the day is long, wouldn't take help from anyone." His voice softened. "Buried her last spring. Pneumonia took her." "I'm sorry," Penelope said quietly. "Point is, sometimes even the strongest folks need someone at their back." He met her gaze directly. "I'll be moving on once you're safe, but not before." That night, the wolves seemed particularly agitated, circling closer despite Tucker's fire. From her window, Penelope watched him stand guard, occasionally firing warning shots when the pack ventured too near. Around midnight, unable to sleep with the persistent howling, she pulled on her shawl and joined him on the porch, bringing a fresh cup of coffee. "You should be sleeping," Tucker said, though he accepted the coffee gratefully. "Hard to sleep through all that racket," she replied, nodding toward the wolves. "Something's got them stirred up tonight. Something's coming. Storm, maybe." Tucker lifted his head, testing the wind. "They can sense it before we can." Penelope huddled deeper into her shawl. "Uncle Ezra used to say the same, said wolves know things we've forgotten." Tucker smiled slightly. "Your uncle sounds like a wise man." "He was, raised me after my parents died in a cholera outbreak." She hadn't meant to share that, but the darkness and Tucker's quiet presence made it easier to speak of things long kept inside. "Taught me to read, to shoot, to survive out here. Said a woman needs to be twice as capable as a man to get half the respect. Seems you learned those lessons well." Penelope stared at the wolves, their eyes reflecting the firelight. "Not well enough, can't even keep wolves from my door. Few can when they're determined enough." Tucker set down his empty cup. "Those wolves, they're just doing what nature made them to do, survive, same as you and me." They sat in companionable silence until Penelope's eyes grew heavy. As she rose to return inside, Tucker spoke without looking at her. "I'll keep them at bay. Get some rest. You need sleep too. I'm fine where I am." Then, softer, almost to himself, "Nothing gets through me." The promised storm arrived before dawn, wet heavy snow that blanketed the clearing and drove the wolves deeper into the forest for shelter. For 3 days, they remained snowbound, the drifts too deep for travel. Tucker moved his bedroll into the main room, sleeping near the fireplace while Penelope took the small bedroom. They fell into an easy routine, Tucker handling the hunting and heavy chores, Penelope cooking and maintaining the cabin. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Tucker proved to be surprisingly well-read, sharing stories of his travels across the West, of the people he'd met and the sights he'd seen. Penelope found herself sharing her own dreams of someday opening a small shop in town, of building something that was truly hers. On the 4th day, as they cleared snow from the path to the lean-to, Penelope noticed Tucker studying the tree line. "Wolves gone?" she asked. "For now," he replied, but his expression remained troubled. "Miss Vance, Penelope," she corrected. After days in close quarters, formality seemed pointless. "Penelope," he amended with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'm concerned about Wilmington and his mining company. Men like that don't give up easy when there's money to be made." "What are you suggesting? That maybe the wolves aren't the only reason I ought to stay a while longer." He leaned on his shovel. "At least until we know what they are up to." Penelope considered his words. The sensible part of her knew she should refuse a single woman living with an unrelated man would cause talk if anyone found out, but the practical side recognized the truth in what he said. Wilmington's thinly veiled threat lingered in her mind. "All right," she agreed finally. "But we need some rules." Tucker's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Only seems fair. You keep sleeping by the fire, not in the bedroom. If anyone from town comes by, you're a hired hand, nothing more." And she hesitated, then pressed on. I need to know you'll tell me when you're ready to leave. No disappearing without warning. Done, done, and done, Tucker agreed easily. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible hired hand. Ask anyone who's employed me. Despite his claim, Tucker proved himself invaluable over the next weeks. He reinforced the cabin's walls against the growing cold, repaired the sagging roof of the lean-to, and even fashioned crude but effective shutters for the windows. When the snow melted enough to permit travel, he rode into Sierra City for supplies, returning with not only food and necessities but also the gossip from town. Sierra Mining's been buying up claims all over, he reported as they unloaded the supplies. Word is they found a rich vein running through these hills. Old Jenkins at the Mercantile says they've been none too gentle with holdouts. Meaning what exactly? Meaning accidents, mysterious fires, problems with water rights suddenly appearing. Tucker's expression was grim. 3 families sold out after their cabins burned down last month. Penelope's stomach tightened with anxiety. You think they set those fires? Can't prove it, Tucker said carefully, but it's mighty convenient for them. That night the wolves returned, their howling a mournful backdrop to Penelope's troubled thoughts. She watched from the window as Tucker maintained his vigil on the porch, a solitary figure in the moonlight. Something about his steadfast presence calmed her fears, at least temporarily. When she brought him coffee, she lingered longer than necessary. Tell me something, she said, settling beside him on the porch step. What's a man like you doing drifting from place to place, no home to call your own? Tucker was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Had one once, he finally said. Farm in Texas, wife, baby on the way, Penelope's breath caught. What happened? War happened. Rode off to fight, came back to find Confederates had burned everything when they retreated. Sarah died in childbirth while I was gone. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands gripped the coffee cup too tightly. After that, walls just seemed like things to pen me in, remind me of what I'd lost. I'm sorry, Tucker, truly. He nodded once, acknowledgement rather than acceptance. Been 11 years now. Sometimes I think I should stop wandering, put down roots somewhere. Then I remember how it feels to lose everything, and moving on seems easier. Impulsively, Penelope reached out, her hand covering his. Not everything that takes root gets destroyed. Tucker looked down at their hands, then up at her face, something shifting in his eyes. For a moment she thought he might say more, might turn his hand to hold hers properly. Instead, he gently withdrew. Best you get some sleep, he said quietly. Dawn comes early. The wolves continued their nightly circling, but their numbers seemed to be dwindling. Tucker reported seeing only 4 one night, then 3 the next. But as the wolf threat receded, Penelope's worry about Wilmington and Sierra Mining grew. Tucker insisted on accompanying her whenever she ventured beyond the immediate clearing, his rifle always within reach. December arrived with bitter cold and the promise of more snow. One morning, as Penelope milked the cow Tucker had purchased in town, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Tucker materialized beside her instantly, rifle ready, positioning himself between her and the approaching riders. 5 men appeared at the edge of the clearing, Wilmington at their center. They reined in their horses at a respectful distance, but the message in their numbers was clear. Miss Vance, Wilmington called, his breath clouding in the cold air. I see you're still enjoying your solitude. State your business, Wilmington, Tucker called back, not lowering his rifle, simply a courtesy call. Wilmington's smile was cold. Wanted to inform Miss Vance that our offer will expire at the end of the week. After that, well, the price might not be so generous. Penelope set down her milk pail and stepped forward. And I wanted to inform you that my answer remains the same. This land isn't for sale. I strongly advise you to reconsider, Wilmington said, his voice hardening. These mountains can be dangerous in winter, so isolated. If something were to happen like those cabin fires last month, Tucker interrupted. Mighty coincidental, those fires starting right after families refused to sell. One of Wilmington's men shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, but Wilmington himself merely shrugged. Accidents happen, particularly to those who don't understand where their best interests lie. Our best interests lie in you leaving our property. Penelope stated firmly, moving to stand beside Tucker. She hadn't missed her use of our, and from the flicker in Tucker's eyes, neither had he. Very well. Wilmington gathered his reins, but consider carefully, Miss Vance. Even the most dedicated employee can't stand guard forever. As the men rode away, Penelope's hands trembled with anger and fear. Tucker's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. They'll be back, she said. Yes, Tucker agreed, but so will we. That evening, as Tucker prepared to take up his usual position on the porch, Penelope stopped him. It's too cold tonight, she said. You'll freeze out there. I've weathered worse. I don't doubt it, but there's no sense in it. She hesitated, then plunged ahead. The wolves are fewer now, and the real threat is Wilmington. You need proper rest if we're to face whatever's coming. Tucker studied her face. What are you suggesting? You take the bedroom tonight. I'll sleep by the fire. He shook his head. Can't put you out of your bed. It's big enough for both if we're careful, she said, the words rushing out before she could reconsider. At his raised eyebrows, she added hastily, with a blanket between us, of course, for propriety. A small smile touched Tucker's lips. Propriety out here in the wilderness. Even in the wilderness, I have my standards, Mr. Yates. His smile widened. And high ones they are, Miss Vance. That night, lying rigid on her side of the bed with a wool blanket forming a barrier down the center, Penelope listened to Tucker's steady breathing beside her. Despite the impropriety, there was comfort in his presence in knowing she wasn't alone in facing whatever came next. Tucker, she whispered into the darkness. His voice was drowsy but alert. Thank you for staying. She felt rather than saw him turn his head toward her. Thank you for letting me. In the morning, Penelope woke to find Tucker already up and building the fire. Neither mentioned their shared sleeping arrangement, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness that lingered in glances that held too long, in the careful way they moved around each other in the cabin's confined space. For the next 2 days, they prepared for Wilmington's return. Tucker reinforced doors and windows while Penelope inventoried their supplies and ammunition. They worked in tandem, communicating with the ease of those who have known each other far longer than a few weeks. On the third night, as they shared a simple supper, Tucker suddenly went still, his head cocked toward the window. Wolves? Penelope asked. No, he set down his fork and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Riders coming fast. Penelope grabbed her rifle as Tucker doused the lanterns, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the firelight. They positioned themselves on either side of the front window, watching as 5 riders emerged from the trees, torches in hand. Wilmington, Tucker confirmed grimly. Looks like they're done waiting. What do they want? The gold's just speculation. Tucker's expression was hard in the faint light. Men like that, once they decide they want something, the reason stops mattering. It becomes about winning, about not being defied. The riders circled the cabin at a distance, torches aloft. Wilmington's voice carried through the night air. Final chance, Miss Vance, sign the deed tonight or we burn you out. Tucker opened the window a crack. There are 2 rifles aimed at you right now, Wilmington. Ride away while you still can, a mocking laugh answered him. 2 against 5, poor odds, cowboy, I've faced worse, Tucker muttered, then called out, This is your last warning, leave now. Instead of answering, one of the riders hurled his torch toward the cabin. It fell short, sizzling out in the snow, but the intent was clear. Tucker turned to Penelope, his face grim. When I give the signal, fire a warning shot. Aim high just to scatter them. I'll try to disable their horses. She nodded, steadying her rifle against the windowsill. Tucker positioned himself at the other window, sighting carefully. Now, he said quietly. Their shots cracked through the night almost simultaneously. Penelope's bullet whistled overhead as intended, but Tucker's found its mark. One of the horses reared in panic, throwing its rider before bolting into the trees. The fallen man shouted in pain. The remaining riders wheeled their mounts, momentarily confused, but Wilmington's angry voice rallied them. Spread out, surround them. Tucker reloaded quickly. They'll try to set fire to the lean-to or the roof. We need to. A sudden chorus of howls cut him off, rising from the darkness beyond the clearing. The horses neighed in terror, fighting their riders' control as more howls answered the first, coming from all directions. The wolves, Penelope whispered, moving to Tucker's side. In the torchlight, they could see 7, no, 9 wolves emerging from the trees, their eyes reflecting the flames as they advanced on the panicked horses. These weren't the cautious, circling wolves of previous nights. These moved with purpose, with hunger, driven by the scent of fear. One of Wilmington's men fired wildly at the approaching wolves, missing entirely. The sound only agitated the horses further. 2 more broke free, throwing their riders into the snow as they fled. Get back. Wilmington screamed, but it was too late. The wolves charged, not at the cabin but at the floundering men in the snow. Their screams pierced the night as Tucker grabbed Penelope's arm. "Stay here," he ordered, heading for the door. "Tucker, no." She cried, but he was already out on the porch, firing shots into the air to scatter the wolves. In the confusion, Wilmington and his one remaining man seized the opportunity to grab their fallen companions and retreat, spurring their terrified horses back toward the trees. The wolves, startled by Tucker's shots, paused in their attack. Several turned toward him, growling low, but a larger wolf, the pack leader, seemed to hesitate, assessing this new threat. Penelope appeared beside Tucker, her own rifle raised. "Back inside," she hissed, slowly. Together, they retreated into the cabin, securing the door behind them. Through the window, they watched as the wolves prowled the clearing, sniffing at the blood-spattered snow where the men had fallen. "They'll be back," Tucker said, though whether he meant Wilmington or the wolves, Penelope wasn't sure. "Both of them, I expect," she replied, reading his thoughts. "Though I'd rather face the wolves." Tucker's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. "We'll be ready." They kept watch through the night, taking turns at the window, but neither Wilmington nor the wolves returned. By dawn, Penelope's nerves were frayed from exhaustion and tension. Tucker didn't look much better, dark circles under his eyes as he stoked the morning fire. "I need to ride into town," he said as he poured coffee. "Get word to the sheriff about what happened." Penelope nodded reluctantly. "You think he'll help?" "Depends on how deep Sierra Mining's pockets go," Tucker admitted, "but there are laws against what Wilmington tried last night. Attempted arson at the very least." "I'm coming with you," she stated, brooking no argument. "We're safer together, and I won't sit here alone waiting for them to return." Tucker studied her determined face and nodded. "We leave in an hour." The ride to Sierra City took most of the day, the trail slowed by patches of snow and ice. They arrived as dusk was falling, the small mining town's main street already lit with lamps. Tucker led them directly to the sheriff's office, where they found a harried-looking man with a graying mustache sorting through wanted posters. "Sheriff Miller?" Tucker inquired. The man looked up, his expression guarded. "Who's asking?" "Tucker Yates. This is Miss Penelope Vance. We need to report an attack on her property last night." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly at Penelope's name. "Miss Vance, Harold Wilmington was in here just this morning speaking of you." Penelope stiffened. "Did he mention attempting to burn down my cabin?" "He mentioned a misunderstanding. Said his men were attacked by wolves while attempting to negotiate a business deal." Sheriff Miller leaned back in his chair. "Said your friend here fired on them unprovoked." "That's a lie," Tucker said evenly. "They came with torches, threatened to burn us out if Miss Vance wouldn't sign over her deed. We fired warning shots only after they threw a torch at the cabin." The sheriff's gaze moved between them, assessing. "Mighty convenient, those wolves showing up when they did." "The wolves have been circling the cabin for weeks," Penelope said. "Ask anyone who's been out that way." Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "Miss Vance, I'll be straight with you. Sierra Mining employs half this town. Their taxes keep our school open and our roads maintained. I'm not saying I don't believe you, but you should know what you're up against. So you won't help us," Tucker concluded flatly. "I didn't say that." The sheriff stood, reaching for his coat. "I'll ride out tomorrow, take a look around, file a report, but don't expect much to come of it. Without witnesses beyond the 2 of you and Wilmington's men, it's your word against theirs." As they left the sheriff's office, Penelope's shoulders slumped with disappointment. So that's it. They can just keep coming until they get what they want. Tucker guided her toward the small hotel at the end of the street. "Not necessarily. Let's get rooms for the night, then figure out our next move." The hotel had only 1 room available, a fact that would have mortified Penelope under different circumstances. Now, she was simply too exhausted to care about appearances. Tucker gallantly offered to sleep in the chair by the window, keeping watch while she took the bed. "We need to know what Sierra Mining wants with my land specifically," Penelope said as she removed her boots. "It can't just be about gold speculation. They're too determined." Tucker nodded, cleaning his revolver by the light of the single lamp. "First thing tomorrow, we should visit the land office, see if there are any records that might explain their interest." Penelope paused, studying his profile in the dim light. "Tucker, you don't have to stay tangled up in my problems. This isn't what you signed on for when you offered to keep the wolves at bay." He looked up, his blue eyes serious. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," she admitted quietly. "But I can't ask you to risk your life fighting my battles." "You didn't ask, I offered." He set the revolver aside. "Besides, I told you nothing gets through me, not wolves, not mining company thugs." His confidence brought a small smile to her lips. "You're a stubborn man, Tucker Yates." "Pot calling the kettle black, Miss Vance," he returned with a slight smile of his own. In the morning, they visited the land office, where a nervous clerk reluctantly allowed them to view the property maps. Tucker studied them carefully, his finger tracing the boundaries of Penelope's land and the surrounding claims now owned by Sierra Mining. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a thin blue line crossing through her property. "Water rights. Your land controls access to the creek that feeds into the main river." "But why would that matter so much? There are other water sources." The clerk, who had been hovering nearby, cleared his throat. "Hydraulic mining," he said quietly. "They need massive amounts of water to blast away hillsides. The new operation they're planning up north needs more water than they currently have access to." Tucker's expression darkened. "And they can't proceed without control of that creek. That's why they're so desperate to get your land." Armed with this knowledge, they made one more stop before leaving town: the newspaper office. The editor, a young man named Patrick Hayes, listened to their story with increasing interest. "Sierra Mining has been throwing their weight around for months," he confirmed. "I've tried publishing stories about their tactics, but they threatened to pull their advertising, which would bankrupt the paper." He hesitated, then added, "But if you've got proof of them attempting arson or making threats, that's something even they can't silence. Would our testimony be enough?" Penelope asked. Hayes looked doubtful. "Without other witnesses or evidence, probably not." As they prepared to leave Sierra City, Tucker pulled Penelope aside in the mercantile where they were purchasing supplies. "I have an idea," he said quietly. "It's risky, but it might be our best chance to stop Wilmington for good. I'm listening." We let them come again. "But this time, we're ready. We get the sheriff and Hayes the editor to be nearby, hidden, to witness what happens." Penelope stared at him. "You want to use us as bait?" "I want to catch them in the act, with witnesses that matter in town." His hand closed gently around her arm. "I won't let anything happen to you, Penelope. I give you my word." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "And if the wolves return too," a grim smile touched his lips. "Then Wilmington might solve our wolf problem for us, or the wolves might solve our Wilmington problem. Either way, we'll be prepared." They rode back to the cabin in tense silence, both aware of the risks in Tucker's plan. Sheriff Miller had agreed to follow at a distance the next evening, and Hayes would accompany him, bringing his camera equipment to document whatever transpired. As they approached the cabin clearing, Tucker suddenly reined in his horse, signaling for Penelope to stop. "Something's wrong," he said softly, scanning the area. "The door's open." They dismounted, tethering their horses to a tree at the edge of the clearing. Tucker drew his revolver, motioning for Penelope to stay behind him as they approached the cabin cautiously. Inside, they found destruction. Furniture overturned, Penelope's few possessions scattered and broken, the fireplace cold and filled with ashes. On the table lay a piece of paper, a crude drawing of flames surrounding a cabin. "Wilmington," Penelope whispered, fury replacing her initial shock. "He's declaring war." Tucker moved methodically through the cabin, assessing the damage. They were searching for something, probably the deed. "It's not here. I keep it in town at the bank." She bent to retrieve a shattered picture frame, the only photograph she had of her parents. They didn't have to destroy everything. That was the point, to show they could. Tucker's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They want you afraid." Penelope looked up, steel in her gaze. "Then they've made a serious misjudgment. I'm not afraid, Tucker, I'm furious." They spent the rest of the day repairing what they could, righting furniture and cleaning up the worst of the mess. By nightfall, the cabin was habitable again, though many of Penelope's personal items were beyond salvaging. As they sat before the newly lit fire, drinking coffee and planning for the next day's confrontation, a familiar howl echoed through the darkness outside. Tucker moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit clearing. "They're back," he said. "All of them." Penelope joined him at the window. The entire wolf pack had returned 9 strong, moving with purpose around the perimeter of the clearing. "Why now?" she wondered aloud. "After they've been gone for days." Tucker watched the wolves' behavior with a frown. "They're agitated. Something's disturbed them." His head lifted suddenly. "Listen." Beyond the wolves' howling came another sound, horses approaching, many of them still some distance away but drawing nearer. "Wilmington," Penelope realized. "He's coming tonight, not tomorrow." Tucker moved quickly, checking his weapons. Change of plans. "We need to get to the horses, try to reach the sheriff." "There's no time," Penelope countered, grabbing her rifle. "They'll be here any minute and we'd have to get past the wolves." Tucker hesitated, torn between the need to protect Penelope and the reality of their situation. Finally, he nodded. "We make our stand here then, but at the first opportunity you run for the trees, head west toward town. I won't leave you to face them alone." "Penelope, no, Tucker." She checked her rifle with practiced movements. "We face this together. Partners, remember." The look he gave her then was complex pride, worry, and something deeper that made her heart race despite the danger. "Partners," he agreed quietly. They positioned themselves strategically, Tucker near the front door, Penelope covering the back. Through the windows, they could see the wolves growing increasingly restless as the sound of approaching riders grew louder. When Wilmington and his men broke through the tree line, there were 8 of them, all armed, all carrying torches. They formed a line at the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the wolves prowled. "Miss Vance," Wilmington called out, "I see you've discovered our little message. I'm here for your answer. Sign the deed or watch your home burn." Tucker opened the door just enough to call back. "She's not signing anything, Wilmington. Leave now before this gets ugly." A chorus of mocking laughter answered him. 2 against 8, Cowboy, not to mention those wolves circling. You've got no way out." As if on cue, one of the wolves, the large alpha male, turned toward the riders, hackles raised. The rest of the pack followed suit, sensing the greater threat. "The wolves don't seem to like you much, Wilmington," Tucker called. "Maybe they've got good judgment." Wilmington's response was to signal his men forward. They advanced cautiously, torches held high, eyes darting between the cabin and the wolves. The wolves retreated slightly but continued to growl, forming a line between the riders and the cabin. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Penelope would struggle to piece it together clearly. One of Wilmington's men, nervous about the wolves, fired his rifle. The bullet struck the ground near the alpha and the wolf charged, leaping at the shooter. The other wolves followed, and suddenly the clearing erupted into chaos. Horses screamed, men shouted, gunfire cracked through the night air. The wolves attacked with coordinated precision, bringing down 2 horses immediately and sending the others into a panic. Wilmington was thrown as his horse reared, his torch flying from his hand and landing dangerously close to a pile of dry brush near the cabin. "The fire," Penelope shouted, pointing to where flames had already begun to spread. Tucker bolted from the cabin, firing into the air to scatter the wolves as he raced toward the growing blaze. Penelope followed with a bucket of water, her heart pounding as she took in the scene around them, wolves and men locked in a desperate struggle, horses fleeing into the trees, Wilmington himself crawling away from his fallen mount. Together, they managed to douse the brush fire before it could spread to the cabin. As the immediate danger passed, Penelope became aware of an eerie stillness. The gunfire had stopped. The wolves had retreated to the edge of the clearing, watching. Of Wilmington's 8 men, 3 lay motionless on the ground, 2 were limping toward the trees supporting each other, and the rest had disappeared, fled, or dragged away by their panicked horses. Wilmington himself sat propped against a tree stump, blood seeping from a wound in his leg where a wolf had torn through his trousers. His face was ashen with shock and pain as Tucker approached him, revolver trained steadily at his chest. "It's over, Wilmington," Tucker said evenly. "Even if you make it back to town, you'll have to explain why 3 of your men are dead and why you were out here with torches in the first place." Wilmington's laugh was hollow. "You think this changes anything? Sierra Mining doesn't stop because of one setback. They'll send others. Better armed, more prepared." "Maybe," Penelope said, coming to stand beside Tucker. "Or maybe they'll reconsider when they learn about the witnesses." Wilmington's eyes narrowed. "What witnesses?" As if in answer, hoofbeats sounded from the trees. Sheriff Miller emerged into the clearing, followed by Patrick Hayes and 2 deputies. Hayes already had his camera out, documenting the scene: the dead men, the torches, Wilmington's wound. "Quite a mess you've made, Wilmington," Sheriff Miller observed, dismounting carefully, his eyes on the wolves still watching from the tree line. "Attempted arson from the looks of it, maybe murder depending on your intentions when you rode out here." "It was self-defense," Wilmington protested. "They set the wolves on us," Hayes snorted as he continued taking photographs. "Even I know you can't set wolves like dogs, Wilmington. Besides, we heard everything. Been hiding in the trees for the past hour, waiting to see what you do." Penelope felt a wave of relief so intense her knees nearly buckled. Tucker's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "You planned this," Wilmington accused, glaring at them. "You knew we were coming." "We suspected," Tucker corrected. "After your men ransacked the cabin, it wasn't hard to guess you'd escalate. We just thought you'd wait another day." As the deputies moved to secure Wilmington and attend to the wounded men, Sheriff Miller approached Tucker and Penelope. "Risky play," he remarked. "Could have gone very wrong." "It nearly did," Penelope admitted. "What happens now?" Tucker asked. Sheriff Miller sighed. "Wilmington faces serious charges. Sierra Mining will likely disavow any knowledge of his actions to save their reputation. As for their interest in your land, Miss Vance, that's not illegal, just their methods. So they could still try to force me out, just more carefully next time," Penelope concluded. "Possibly. But after Hayes publishes these photographs and the story, they'll be under scrutiny. Might decide your little creek isn't worth the trouble." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Either way, you've bought yourself some time." As the sheriff and his men prepared to transport Wilmington and the bodies back to town, Penelope noticed the wolves had vanished, melting back into the forest without a sound. She turned to find Tucker watching her, his expression unreadable in the fading torchlight. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, suddenly exhausted as the tension of the night drained away. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't been here." "But I was." His hand reached up, hesitantly brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you, nothing gets through me." The simple touch, the gentleness in his voice broke something loose inside her. Penelope stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his chest. After a moment's surprise, Tucker's arms came around her, holding her securely as the last of the riders disappeared into the trees, leaving them alone in the clearing. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." Penelope knew she should pull away, maintain the boundaries they'd established, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Tucker's heartbeat against her ear was the most reassuring sound she'd ever heard. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." His arms tightened briefly before he stepped back, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. "Let's get inside. It's cold and it's been a long night." In the cabin, they moved in comfortable silence, Tucker building up the fire while Penelope prepared a simple meal from their supplies. Neither mentioned what would come next, though the question hung unspoken between them. With Wilmington arrested and the immediate threat past, Tucker's reason for staying had ended. As they ate, Penelope finally gathered her courage. "What will you do now?" "Will you continue to Sacramento as you planned?" Tucker set down his cup, his gaze thoughtful. "Seems I've missed the best part of the winter work there. Most crews will be hired by now." "So you'll move on elsewhere," she concluded, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "I could." He studied her face carefully. "Or I could stay if there's a reason to." Penelope's heart quickened. The wolves might come back, a small smile touched his lips. They might at that. And Sierra Mining could try again once the scandal dies down, true enough. The cabin needs a lot of work before spring. The roof leaks in 3 places and the north wall needs reinforcing. Tucker's smile widened. Penelope Vance, are you offering me a job? She met his gaze steadily. I'm offering you a home, Tucker, if you want it. The teasing light in his eyes softened into something more serious. And what would the town think, a single woman living with a drifter? I imagine they'd think we should get married, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Tucker went very still. Is that what you want? I want you to stay, she said honestly. The terms are negotiable. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I've been drifting a long time, Penelope, not sure I remember how to stay in one place. I could remind you, she offered softly. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I reckon you could at that. That night, for the first time, they shared the bed without the blanket barrier between them. Tucker held her close, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arms secure around her. Outside, a lone wolf howled in the distance, but the sound no longer brought fear. They won't come too close again, Tucker murmured sleepily. Not after tonight, they've made their point. What point is that this territory is claimed, by them and by us? Penelope smiled against his chest. Partners in keeping the boundaries clear. Partners in everything, he amended, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new beginnings. Sierra Mining, its reputation tarnished by the scandal of Wilmington's arrest and subsequent trial, withdrew its interest in Penelope's land and focused its operations elsewhere. The wolves still roamed the mountains, but they kept their distance, appearing occasionally on the ridge above the cabin as silent observers. On a clear May morning, Penelope stood beside Tucker before the small church in Sierra City, exchanging vows that formalized what they had known for months, that they belonged together, that in finding each other they had both found home. Their wedding gift from the town was unexpected but fitting, a carved wooden sign for their property that read Yates Homestead, and below it, in smaller letters, Nothing gets through us. That evening, as they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Tucker's arm around her waist, Penelope realized how much had changed in 6 short months. The wolves no longer brought fear but a strange comfort, wild sentinels sharing their mountain. The cabin was no longer a place of lonely survival but a true home filled with plans and possibilities. And Tucker, the drifting cowboy who had once slept on her porch as a barrier against danger, now slept beside her as a partner in all things. Any regrets? He asked, seeming to read her thoughts. Penelope turned in his arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. Not a single one. From the ridge above their cabin, a wolf howled a lone call, quickly answered by its pack. Tucker smiled against her lips. Sounds like approval to me, he murmured. As twilight deepened into night, they moved inside to the warmth of their fire, leaving the porch empty for the first time in months. They no longer needed a sentry against the darkness. Together, they had proven the truth of Tucker's promise: nothing would get through them, not wolves, not danger, not even the loneliness that had once haunted them both. They had claimed their territory, marked their boundaries, found their pack of 2. And like the wolves on the ridge, they would defend it together for all the days to come. Years later, when they had children of their own, a son with Tucker's steady gaze and a daughter with Penelope's determination, they would tell the story of how they met, of wolves and danger and a cowboy who slept on the porch. The children would beg to hear again how their father had stood against both 2-legged and 4-legged threats, always ending with his now famous words, "Nothing gets through me." And Penelope would add, as she always did, the truth they had learned together: nothing gets through us. For in the wild heart of the western mountains, they had discovered that the greatest strength lies not in standing alone against danger, but in standing together, a lesson taught by wolves, by adversity, and by the love that had transformed 2 solitary souls into an unbreakable team. And on quiet nights, when wolves still circled their thriving homestead, Their howls were no longer harbingers of fear, but reminders of the wild beauty that had brought Tucker and Penelope together, sentinels of a love story written in starlight and courage, in promises kept and boundaries defended. Nothing got through them, nothing ever would.